Welcome to the Point. In Lansing, work on a budget for next year is moving forward, and while the process continues, we talk with House Appropriations Committee member Representative Rachel Hood, a Grand Rapids Democrat. Representative, let's talk about where the budget process is. As you and I were talking beforehand, and I was saying kind of anecdotally, it feels like you're kind of on track to get to that statutory July 1st deadline, which to the best of my recollection has not yet been met since it was passed, but there have been a lot of intervening things in there, including a pandemic. But talk to me about the process as an appropriator. Where are we now and what still needs to be done? And from your perspective, what does this budget look like?
Thanks, Rick. It's great to be here. I would say that the budgets are on track, but we have a long way to go before we come to full agreement. The budgets that have been passed in the House and Senate are a good framework, but there are several investments that still need to be made in order to have a complete and responsible budget for our government, to run our government smoothly, to provide the services that we are expected to provide to the people of the state of Michigan. There are some very strident messages, very political messages in the budget coming out of the House and the Senate. The governor will have to work to negotiate and to clean this up so that it works for all of us.
So the process is that the House comes up with their plan, the Senate comes up with their plan, the governor's already laid out her plan. Now, one of the things that I recognize in putting together a family budget is it's easier to do when you have enough revenue. Now, my family budget's not $74 billion, but at the state level, there is plenty of revenue. I mean, which has not always been the case. So that's one plus for being able to get this done. But it also creates another situation where there are a lot of asks when you have that much money out there. How difficult has it been to kind of, at least, and you point out quite rightly, we're kind of in the interim, we're not at the end yet. How difficult has it been, because there is so much money, trying to put priorities in place?
Well, I think it has provided some opportunities for dollars to be consumed by priorities that may be slightly out of balance. For instance, we know that Representative Albert, the chair of House Appropriations, has long been interested in investing to make sure our pensions are whole. So there are big investments in local government pensions, MIPSers, the school pension program. I think those are great investments, but there are questions to be asked about how much of this money do we want to put into that versus the investments that we need today for our kids in mental health, for instance. We're still negotiating aspects of the mental health investments in the school budget. And I think if you talk to parents around our communities, they would say this is a more immediate issue. And yes, we want to make some good investments against this pension debt, but we don't want to forgo our kids' ability to be successful in school and to get back on track after COVID. That is our priority. So some of those value statements in the budget need to be ironed out and properly balanced. I think we can do both, and we can shore up these pensions and also invest in the immediate needs of our communities. I think also we need to understand that Michigan has been in budget deficits for decades. We've really struggled to come out of economic recessions that have hit the country and the globe over the last 2 decades. We are back on track, and that is wonderful news, but we still have a lot of foregone investment in our roads and our infrastructure that we need to catch up on. That is in the multiple billions of dollars of neglect on those infrastructure investments. And even with all of this federal money coming in, we are not quite grasping at those really sustained solutions at our revenue structure and how we can, over a long period of time, with help from the feds, advance, make some good strides forward, but then also keep those investments on track to catch up within the next couple of decades on that lost maintenance and investment.
One of the questions that comes to mind for me is sustainability, because there is so much revenue, so much federal money that has come into the state. And I realize there are a couple of different piles. State revenues are up, and so that's a good thing.
Right.
The federal dollars that have come in are there and available. That's a good thing, but that's a one-time thing.
That's right.
And the sustainability of the state revenues is got to be an open question, because we don't know what business looks like going forward, particularly with inflation and higher prices and all the things we're seeing. All of that said, when you talk about wanting to make further investments, for example, in infrastructure, how do you do that? I drive on the roads every day, I get it, but how do you do that and have a better than average chance of that being sustainable?
Well, I think a lot of our infrastructure maintenance issues are great one-time spends, particularly when we're not talking about building new infrastructure, but rather just advancing the infrastructure that already exists and making sure that we are maximizing that existing resource, repairing and getting it ready for the next 50, 100 years, depending on its life cycle. I think we have been careful to parse out those one-time investments against an investment in perhaps another high-value investment is our investment in our kids in schools in the K-12 budget or in higher ed. We have made advances in these spaces. They are stepwise, cautious advances that are rooted in the gains we've seen in the budget. And hopefully we won't have to step back on those. We can keep our economy on track. We are doing well with the fundamentals. Our bond rating is excellent right now, and I think that the structure of the budget is strong. We just need to be cautious in balancing those one-time investments against ongoing.
Always happens because we run out of time too quickly, but I don't want our time to run out until I get you to elaborate a little bit. You said in the budget there are some strident political statements or something to that effect. What are some of the things that you think, not that everything isn't somehow politically motivated, but that you think is politically motivated in a year that concern you?
Yeah, we see cuts to lead line replacement and water treatment system updates that would be investments in disadvantaged communities that are served by Democrats rather than Republicans. There's a failure to, there are several instances where for instance, the Independent Redistricting Commission Voting Rights Compliance Study calling to look deeper into whether or not the Redistricting Commission complied with the Federal Voting Rights Act, and we're concerned about that. Several questions around how we invest in women's health and in adoption versus access to health. These are the types of questions where in a lack of investment in the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, for instance. These are some of the issues that we don't see investment in, where priorities could and should be made, and they are not. Health disparities is another space. So I think I think there is a difficult conversation ahead at the quadrant level to balance these priorities.
That July 1st deadline, given all the cash and all the campaigns that have to be run, will we see a budget agreement by July 1st?
I think we will see a schools budget completed by the end of June, so our schools can stay on track. We were able to do that last cycle. I think we can move forward. I am cautiously optimistic we'll get done by July 1st, but I would not be surprised if some aspects of the budget keep us working through August and early September.
Getting the budget done by a July 1st goal put into statute a few years ago hasn't happened since that bill passed. But with a big election on the way and members anxious to get home to campaign, plus a big surplus of cash, it is quite possible we will see an early resolution to those budget talks this year. Up next, we conclude our conversation with retiring Congressman Fred Upton as he prepares to step away after decades of serving in the U.S. House, what he wants to achieve in his time remaining in office. That's next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. After redistricting put Congressman Bill Huizenga and Congressman Fred Upton in the same district, the two Republicans faced what might have been the hottest primary race in the state. But before that could happen, Upton decided after 36 years to retire at the end of this term. That doesn't mean he's done trying to get things done. He talked to me about one of his signature pieces of legislation and how he is trying to expand on that.
The other big issue that's consumed a lot of my time the last couple of years, in fact, I've got calls the rest of this week, even though I'm here at home, 21st Century Cures, you know all about that. This was the bill to expedite the approval of drugs and devices, coupled with $45 billion more in health research. It's why we got a vaccine for COVID months, maybe 6, 8, 10 months earlier than otherwise it would have happened had that not happened when I was chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee.
I'm going to interrupt just for a second, because for people who don't know, not only was that a big change in the way that people manufacture drugs and medical devices, but it was sponsored by you and I believe Diana DeGette from Colorado, a Democrat. It was a bipartisan bill that was approved and signed by then President Obama.
It's the last bill he signed into law. It passed the House 392 to 26. No, we didn't get Justin Amash to vote for it, but just about everybody else. But we're now working on version 2.0, and we've been working on this really since 2016. And I'd like to think that in the next couple of weeks, and we've had a hearing on it already, it's going to involve things that we've learned since then. Telemedicine. Huh. Can you imagine going through another pandemic without utilizing more telemedicine so that physicians and health professionals can actually deal with people that are suffering this terrible disease from their home versus bringing them into the city or whatever? We learned that. More research and drugs for opioids. I mean, all those different things. There's a whole number of bipartisan issues that we think we can move forward, and couple it with one of President Biden's main initiatives now called ARPA-H. This is Advanced Research for Healthcare, and we funded it. The President signed it into law for $1 billion a little bit earlier this year as part of the Keep the Government Open. But we want to authorize it. We want to make sure that it does what it says it's going to do, very much what DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project, did for the Department of Defense. This is where we can look at breakthrough therapies for new drugs and devices outside of the normal bureaucracy that the NIH or others might have. And it was, he pitched it in his State of the Union address a year ago. We've now funded it. We want to make sure that it works. And so that, too, is part of my agenda as we see things move through the committee that I serve.
One of the parts of your agenda for the, I would guess for the duration, but certainly put into action over the past few years, is trying to get people in Congress to get along. You're in the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is an equal number of Republicans and Democrats, and you take a position in that caucus. You've got enough members now that you can make a big difference when it comes to votes. What can you do? What do you want to do in these remaining months to make sure that effort continues even though you won't be there?
Well, good question. So we're actually taking in 2 new members this week. One from Michigan, but I'll wait till see, we got to have a vote. So we're going to have 60 members, so it'll be 30 members equally divided between Republicans and Democrats. We meet, I'm not kidding, we meet for an hour or two literally every single week. And during the COVID times, we did Zooms. And when we're back in session, we meet usually Wednesdays before the committees meet for an hour. And we have different initiatives. And frankly, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that the president signed into law was a direct product of what we did dating back to a year ago when Governor Larry Hogan, Republican governor, called a bunch of us up, House members, senators, Republicans, Democrats, other governors as well. Larry Summers, who's been in charge of economics, I think, top guy at Harvard for forever. We decided what should infrastructure look like, and how do we pay for it? Unlike some of the COVID packages that were always unpaid, we wanted to pay for it. We wanted to be fiscally responsible. That debate was much of last summer, passed overwhelmingly in the Senate, 69-30. And then, of course, Trump came out against it. He said he could do better, $2 trillion instead of 1.2, and he didn't pay for any of it. So, and said, in essence, wait till 25, and when I'm back, and we said we can't wait, we can't wait. And then that was the bill that really the problem solvers led, and we got the bill to the president for him to sign the end of last year. Now we're just beginning to see the fruits of that bill go. But, whether it's immigration reform, we got this huge issue right now, of course, at the border with this change on the asylum level that may or may not occur before the end of May. But I'd like to think our Problem Solvers Caucus, before the month is out, will be able to stop that change and not see maybe a tripling of folks coming across the border, which otherwise that's what the experts are saying. So we got a big agenda. We're active, and one of the things, what's said in that room stays quiet. We have a rule that you can't work against other people on the other side, so you don't lend your name on a political event or fund, give a campaign contribution, that type of thing. And at the end, when we have a vote on something, we then vote as a block. And we had a vote on an issue this week, and I don't know what the result is yet. I'll find out from my phone here shortly, but we'll be together. But it's in essence a governing, and we have a pledge on civility. You're not going to see anyone throw hard balls at each other's heads. You'll be out if you do that. So these are what I would call pretty reasonable people. In fact, as you know, Debbie Dingell is a member of the group. She and I are actually doing the Grand Rapids Economic Club in a couple weeks here. We were supposed to do it in February, but it was Valentine's Day, and then I got COVID, so the date's now, I think, the 23rd of May.
When you think back to that infrastructure bill, that was something that, again, had bipartisan support, but it also had some people, pretty agitated. And some of the response, the feedback that you got after that was and I listened to some of them, some really hateful calls that came into your office. And obviously, you heard that response. What did that do for you as a member of Congress, knowing that you had worked on a bipartisan piece of legislation, something, you changed part of what the president had proposed in order to get the votes to get it passed in the Senate and in the House in a bipartisan way, yet there was this great vitriol towards you and other members who voted for it. What was that like for you?
Well, some of it came back to the whole Trump issue from before, but yeah, it's sort of it's really sad. It sort of now comes with the territory a little bit, and some of the hatred that's out on frankly on both sides, but they didn't want to give Biden a win. Well, you can't wait on stuff like this. I've got Benton Harbor. I'm going to be there in the next week or so. We're going to be looking at the replacement of lead service lines. They had hundreds of folks. Similar to what happened in Flint, but it's more than just Benton Harbor. It's all across the country. We know our roads here are, suck. Amy, don't watch me say that. But they're bad. You almost don't want to drive at night when you see some of these potholes when you're crossing the street. Broadband, man, it's time. It's time to get this thing done. Again, that was part of this. But for the people, some of the threats that I got, they just are so angry that Trump lost and Biden won. They just don't want to get a win, and they don't ever want you to cross the aisle to work to get something done. And that's what's really sad. And, thank goodness, we've got people in the problem solvers. It's, Lindsey Graham, this was always frustrating to the other side. Lindsey Graham was Donald Trump's best friend in the Senate. He voted for the bill. when they passed 69-30. I mean, if it's good enough for Lindsey Graham, why can't we get this thing done when it was bipartisan from the get-go to get it done? But, you know, those threats, I mean, talk to your school board members now. I mean, we got recalls and some of the death threats that they get, and those are, you know, I've always said school board members and city council members are often the toughest elective office there is, because if, you know, pretty much they're not paid, and they take a lot of personal abuse as well.
The makeup of Congress will be different starting in the first of the year, but how different it is will make a big difference about what gets done. I think you said you think the majority needs to be somewhere around, what, 230? To be able
The
to govern?
House, I think, is going to flip. And, you know, we're just starting these primaries now. We had Ohio and Indiana. I think it's going to be about 230 for the, you know, ask me again, and I'll be up. I'm not leaving. But to me, to govern as Republicans, you got to have more than 230. If you're at 230, and our leader is Kevin McCarthy, I think it will be very difficult for Kevin to actually get things done in the next 2 years if it's below 230. So that's, you know, most experts, Charlie Cook, everybody, it's going to be, you know, it's going to be a good year for Republicans for a lot of reasons. The House is likely to flip. So we're about 210 now. We got a couple of vacancies because of deaths and that type of thing. So we have to pick up about 15 or 20 seats. 218 is the magic mark, of course. If you have 218, that's the party in power. But to govern, knowing that you got people on the outer edges of reality, you really got to be above 230. So that's going to be what people are going to have to look at come November.
Final question that we'll take care of in this interview, and this will not be our last, but you talk about Republicans having a good year, and historically that would be the case. Roe versus Wade is very likely, if the Supreme Court follows through on that leaked draft, is likely to become a very important issue in this year's election and likely to highly motivate a number of people in the Democratic base. Does that change the complexion of the election?
You know, I would say, and I just came from a policy conference this past weekend, so it was before the leaked document came out. We talked about it a little bit, and I got to say that many observers that were there thought that this is about where the court would come out in terms of the decision by them. And I'm not a lawyer, I've not read the draft report, but they, by agreeing to hear the case based on what some states have done, it sort of let someone believe that that's the track that they were going to be on. Suburban women are going to be very motivated on this. Already just walking into the studio here this morning, I heard that Louisiana is talking about charging people with homicide. So where does this go? I mean, what other issues? They can look at gay marriage. I mean, you know, all of a sudden. So it's going to be a factor. And where abortion is, I would say, has been a little bit of a sleeper issue the last couple of cycles. You know, you ask about the environment or inflation or, you know, Ukraine is recent. And abortion's been at like 1 or 2%, way down in the polls. It's now going to be much higher, and it is going to motivate folks. It will make a difference. I think Republicans still take the majority just based on the off-year election, and the economy is still number one.
When we come back, final thought, to the point. This year's election will feature a number of high-profile races, including that for governor. We'll be bringing you more information about that and all the races you will need to decide each week, right here, to the point.